Ashveil is actually a lot stronger than what you may have been led to believe, and in this video I'll be going over why that is the case, his builds, themes and so on, but first let's start with his kit. His main gimmick is his bait. This debuff exists on the field at all times and marks only one enemy. However, when bait is on the field, all enemies have their defense reduced by 40%. So much for nihility supports, right? The thing about bait though is that if you defeat the enemy with it, it automatically transfers to the lowest HP enemy. And unlike Topaz, both his skill and ultimate can change who the bait is, making it a lot easier to control. But if he uses his skill on a target that is already the bait, he additionally deals 100% attack, so 300% total, and he can even recover a skill point, unfortunately another quality of life feature that Topaz does not have. The other important mechanics in this kit are these two different kinds of stacks. Chargers, which is this icon above his HP bar, and Gluttony, which are these stacks below. Chargers are what you get after Ashveil uses his ultimate or at the start of battle, up to a maximum of 3. Basically, these are how many follow-ups Ashveil has remaining after an ally attacks the bait. So one charge is one follow-up attack, except Ashveil also regenerates 8 fixed energy when allies attack the bait. And after the follow-up attack, not during, Ashveil gains 2 stacks of Gluttony up to a maximum of 12. So Gluttony does 2 things. Firstly, it increases his follow-up damage based on his current number of stacks, in addition to a fixed 80%. And secondly, it gives Ashveil more follow-ups after using his ultimate. This is because his ultimate is quite unique. Firstly, it deals 400% attack and gains 3 charges. Afterwards, it allows Ashveil to perform an enhanced follow-up attack that does not consume charge, and for every 4 stacks of Gluttony, he will consume those stacks to perform another follow-up attack. The maximum at E0 is again 12 stacks, but he actually gets 4 follow-up attacks in total. When you slow it down, you can actually see it activate 4 times, and if that's not enough evidence for you, I've also calculated it here. So 1 follow-up first for free, and then we get 3 follow-ups that each consume 4 stacks of Gluttony. The interesting thing about this is that because it's consuming Gluttony, your follow-up damage from each attack slowly decreases because you lose the damage boost from the trace. Also, even though it's 4 follow-up attacks damage-wise, it is actually still counted as only 1 attack, so it's 1 attack from the ultimate and then 1 attack from the enhanced follow-ups. Of course, being a 4.x DPS, the extra quality of life we have for Ashveil's ultimate is that because bait transfers automatically when the enemy is defeated, it can keep dealing damage to other enemies even after you defeat the first one. And if it defeats the last enemy in the wave, you instead save your Gluttony stacks for your next ultimate, which will also mean higher uptime on the follow-up damage boost. So not only do you save the damage from overkilling, but you actually gain damage overall as well. The rest of his kit is just extra damage and features that make it easier to play him. For example, he gives 40% crit damage to all allies just by existing, and if allies, including himself, use a follow-up attack, it increases by an additional 80% to 120% crit damage. Finally, his skill also gives 1 Gluttony, while his ultimate can give 2, and if Ashveil defeats an enemy with his follow-up and only his follow-up attack, he gains 1 extra Gluttony. So as a quick summary, firstly he applies bait automatically and starts at 3 charges, 2 from his talent and 1 from his technique. Allies attack the bait to regenerate energy for Ashveil while consuming his charges for follow-up attacks. Ashveil then uses his ultimate to get a ton of damage from his enhanced follow-up attack while refreshing his charges to 3, and then you repeat. Just from this, there are a few things to the kit we can spot. Ashveil is almost like a pseudo harmony / nihility hunt DPS. Just by existing, he gives the team defense reduction and crit damage while dealing great damage himself, sort of like Tribi. However, Ashveil's damage is heavily reliant on his ultimate and hence energy regen. Hence, if you don't have external energy regen like Sunday's ultimate or Action Advance, your team must be able to attack very frequently. The other issue is that Ashveil gives a ton of self buffs to himself. Currently, in Ashveil's case, having high attack multipliers is better than having so many self buffs. This is because we have to consider Ashveil's supports and teams. A quick sneak peek of the team building section, but Sunday, Sparkle and Robin are very good supports for Ashveil. Combined with Ashveil's S1, his kit has a total of 20% vulnerability, 40% attack, up to 200% follow-up damage boost, and up to 120% crit damage. The issue is, Sunday, Sparkle and Robin all also give the same stats. Hence, the effectiveness of the buffs will be lower than if Ashveil had less buffs but a higher attack multiplier. So if, for example, with Sunday I increase the multiplier to 360% attack but remove the follow-up damage boost completely, so 200% damage boost gone. Instead of an 80% damage increase from Sunday, it is now 130% and also deals more damage. And for Sparkle, again 360% attack, but I remove the 130% crit damage instead. It goes from 75% to a 90% damage increase. However, this can work both ways. Even though it's slightly worse for hyper carry teams with multiple supports, in dual carry teams, Ashveil also suffers less from running more DPS units than supports. The thing is, Ashveil is currently way better as a hyper carry than in a dual carry team. Feixiao is almost a 2-year-old unit, so it's not really surprising she's starting to fall behind, but this is also because Ashveil gets less turns and less energy in a dual carry team. This then means he gets to use his ultimate less frequently, and again, this is responsible for most of Ashveil's damage, and I believe this is currently the biggest issue that is holding back dual carry Ashveil teams. This means even though Ashveil is pretty good in a dual carry team, we do not have a strong enough secondary carry for Ashveil to be played with. So in the future, if we get a stronger and faster follow-up DPS, Ashveil dual carry might actually become his best team, or if Hoyoverse is feeling a little bit crazy, honestly, triple follow-up DPS might be possible as well. But for now, hyper carry Ashveil is probably the best Hun unit in the game on release and is the best way to play him. He's able to beat out teams like Sustainers Archer, even with the Sparkle buffs, and if you're using E1 Sparkle plus E1 3B, it can still increase further, all of this with a sustain by the way. The issue in gameplay is that we are getting quite a lot of HP inflation, and there are very few stages that Ashveil is actually good in that are available on the creator server. I did manage to one cycle Lagos who has Lightning Rest and Nikodos, the new Memory of Chaos 12, with a lot of HP without any Eidolons or at about 6 cost. I think it's because this Memory of Chaos will overlap with 4.2 and it's usually easier to deal with Nikodos with AoE attacks, so not the best stages for him, but in reality, Ashveil should have quite a few stages he's good in, like the Kokolia stage in 3.8, but literally none of these enemies are available to test on. Other than Sam in Pure Fiction 4, where I did very comfortably get a 40k perfect score. So I do think his performance in game right now is a bit misleading, but there are also some signs of power creep or HP inflation coming pretty soon. And he's not only good in low target scenarios, he's also pretty decent in higher target scenarios as long as you are able to defeat them pretty easily. Now for builds, a lot of what's best in Scott is completely dependent on what theme you are using. Firstly, for 4-piece Relic Sets, we have Ash Blazing Grand Duke, while for planers, there are quite a few options. The two main options being Duran and City of Converging Stars. This is the new planar ornament in 4.1. The others are just worse options, so I only really care about the first two, and it's kind of dependent on which support you are using. If you are using Sunday, City of Converging Stars is very slightly better, but if you're using Sparkle, Duran is actually better. This is most likely because Sunday already gives a ton of damage boost, and Sparkle also already gives a ton of attack. If Ashveil's future best in slot team is a dual DPS team, City of Converging Stars should most likely be better because it's a crit damage boost for the entire team. The issue is that it sucks for stages without a weak enemy to kill instantly. Otherwise, on some stages you cannot activate the crit damage buff at all, or it takes too long to activate it. Hence, D-Run should be the most consistent and most versatile and is what I mainly used for my calculations here. For Relic builds, it's usually crit body, attack or speed boots, attack or damage op, and usually attack rope, but sometimes energy regen rope. The issue with energy regen is that the energy he recovers from allies hitting the bait is a fixed 8 energy, so it's not affected by ERR, but it can increase the energy from his own attacks, like the follow-up attack, the skill, the ultimate, but unfortunately that isn't a whole lot. So I've only really used the energy regen rope for the Robin plus Feixiao team, because Ashveil is pretty close to the third ultimate at the end of the simulation. As usual, ERR versus attack rope, like theoretically, is always just dependent on whether you can get one more ultimate. So with decent or good RNG, attack rope should always perform better, but with ER rope, it helps with scenarios where you get very little energy from enemies, but that rarely happens, so I usually use attack rope. Attack or speed boots are also quite straightforward. If using Sparkle, obviously you go attack boots. If you're running Sunday or dual DPS, pretty much always speed boots. The most complicated one is attack versus damage op. Just like Ashveil's planers, it's completely dependent on the team that you are using. Once again, if you really have a ton of damage boost, so like with Sunday, attack op is usually better, so whichever stat you have less of, you run the other planar. If I have more damage boost, I run Converging Stars. If I have a lot of attack, I go for D-Run. Now for light cones, firstly we have his signature, 18% crit rate, and after 4 follow-up attacks or at the start of battle, 40% attack and 20% vulnerability for all enemies. For some reason though, other hunt light cones usually have some weird passive that restricts their playstyle or effectiveness, like Topaz's signature, which is why there is quite a big difference there. The issue with Worrisome Blissful is that you want to keep hitting the same enemy, so it's quite hard to apply the crit damage debuff to multiple enemies, and debuffs are straight up worse as well. Next, we have the Better Pass Light Cone, See You at the End, and Swordplay S5. Swordplay should actually perform worse here because it increases the damage based on each hit, and that is genuinely impossible to calculate without knowing the exact hit split. So in reality, should drop a little bit, which is why I have CU at the end higher, because the buffs are unconditional, but swordplay is still a really good light cone as well. Next, we have the free-to-play option, cruising in the Stellar Sea. I really don't like the conditional crit rate, but the attack is quite nice. This light cone is the inverse of the others. It should perform better against more enemies because usually 1 or 2 shot them, meaning both the crit rate and attack buff will have a higher uptime than whatever is calculated here. Only Silence Remains gives you crit rate when there are 2 or less enemies. Since this simulation starts with 3, it loses a little bit of damage at the start, but if you start with only 2 enemies, it can sometimes outperform cruising. Finally, we have Final Victor. It's quite similar to swordplay except it has to be crit hits. The issue is that it gives you crit damage instead of damage boost that Ashveil already has a ton of, which is why it performs the worst. Now for team building, like I said, 3B, Sunday, Sparkle and Robin are very good supports for him right now. 3B does have some anti-synergy with her ultimate zone because Ashveil can only hit 1 enemy, but the reason why she's used in pretty much all of his best teams is due to her follow-up attack. Respan is also very strong and is one of the key stats missing from Ashveil's damage, so her buffs are also quite good on him. Sunday is actually really strong with Ashveil, even though his buffs are worse for him than Sparkle. This is because you can give Ashveil 2 extra turns, so 4 turns total. On top of regenerating extra energy for him, a Sunday plus 3B team is very consistently able to get 3 ultimates in one cycle, while most other teams usually only get 2. Naturally, because all his damage is tied to the ultimate, this is really strong for Ashveil. By the way, I'll be posting some Ashveil showcases soon, so if you like well-researched guides and gameplay, be sure to subscribe for that. But anyways, Sparkle's buffs are quite strong now, but Ashveil does have access to vulnerability and a ton of crit damage already, so it's not as effective but still fairly strong for Ashveil. Robin is about 9% worse than 3B with Sunday. She can give Ashveil and Sunday an extra turn, so 6 turns in one cycle, but she cannot proc Ashveil's charges, and of course once again attack and damage boost is fairly saturated for Ashveil already. The truth is none of these supports are really good for Ashveil or anything. It's more like we have no other choice right now, and these are the best that we can work with, and I imagine can change when we get more supports for follow-ups. Of course, if you still want to run dual DPS, it's the same few characters as usual, Feixiao, Mose, March and Topaz, but they are quite outdated, which again is why Hypercarry does better. RMC and so on are also decent alternatives, but Ashveil cannot get the full true damage boost because he only has 150 energy, and 3B still attacks more frequently than RMC. Focusing on dual carry teams, Ashveil is a huge upgrade for Feixiao, but once again, Ashveil performs better without Feixiao. However, if you are to play such a team, Lushaka and Bomage should ideally be on Ashveil. The reason why you do this is because Ashveil attacks more frequently and also deals more damage in total, which is why I place Ashveil in the first slot for Lushaka, and then I use Dunhing's skill on him at the start of the battle. For speed tuning, if you only want to use 3 ultimates, Feixiao needs about 134 speed for 3 turns, which is really easy to get, but for 4 ultimates, Feixiao can run attack boots at 117 speed. However, the 4 ultimate setup is a little bit awkward because ideally you want to use Feixiao's skill first because it gives 48% attack, but you can stack her ultimate to the maximum even before her first turn because she's using attack boots, so you probably have to sack a bit somewhere, but I can see it being useful for some stages. Now for vertical investment, E1 is extra vulnerability. Right now it's kinda meh because in both of Ashveil's best teams we run 3B, and if you do run Sparkle, that's another 30%, right? In the future, it could be better, but for now, it's still quite decent at about 20% increase. E2 increases Gluttony to 18 from 12, and it refunds 35% of the Gluttony after his ultimate, but it seems to round down. This can give you 1 extra follow-up, but mostly it just gives you higher uptime on the follow-up damage boost that is already diminishing with Sunday. E4 is a 40% attack boost after using his ultimate for 3 turns, so it's decent with Sunday, but it's going to be severely diminishing with Sparkle, especially if you have E1 or Ashveil's S1. It still shows as a pretty decent boost because E3 actually increases ultimate level by 2, which increases the attack multiplier of not only the ultimate attack, but the enhanced follow-ups after that as well. Finally, E6 is 20% extra respan, and now for each stack of Gluttony, Ashveil gains 4% damage boost up to 30 stacks. So in a longer scenario, this will be better because you have a higher uptime on the maximum damage boost, but it is still his best Eidolon by far, a 73% increase in total damage. If we do get a better dual carry team, all of these Eidolons should still improve percentage-wise because once again, Ashveil is suffering quite a bit of oversaturation in a hypercarry team. Finally, for E1 versus S1, they are very equal. Right now, E1 S0 is slightly better, but that's because this is using Sunday. If you're using Sparkle, as one should be better, so I don't really recommend one over the other. Both are pretty good if you want to get those. I just probably wouldn't get E2. That is pretty much it for my Ashveil guide. If it helped you, a like on the video would be much appreciated, but thanks for watching and see you.